All right, welcome back to the lounge within The Conversation, theconversation.cc. Great to be joined by James and Emery. And after a bit of a break, we're chatting a bit and kicking around some ideas. And Emery, you had the idea of doing it sort of like a channel where you have programming, like a television channel, and we schedule in certain programming. So here's what I think about that. I think we should definitely have rooms or conversations, but separate Zoom rooms from the lounge where we do have that kind of programming. So if somebody shows up to the lounge, and let's say there's nothing particularly going on in the lounge, right? It could just be one person on the night shift or something like that. Well, over here on, channel 2, we've got this program going, and on channel 4, we got this other program going, right? And, they just click over there. And there are some cool ways to like watch a video with other people together and like chat back and forth to each other about it. Well, of course you can do that within Zoom, but there's some, even I think like Jitsi has like some really cool ways of like, let's say the three of us are watching the same video, right? And we want to watch it together. Any one of the three of us could hit the pause button and say, hey, right there, do you hear what they just said? Da, 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 da. And then we hit play again, right? Anyway, that's something you can do on Jitsi. But
you just make everybody a co-host, and you can pause.
Yeah, I suppose. Although it's only one person who's screen sharing, right? And so whoever's screen sharing is the one who has the control of the video in Zoom. But but Jitsi has like a special feature where you like, I don't know, like upload the link to Jitsi and it's kind of like played on their I don't know how it works, but it's sophisticated and it works, right? But anyway, well, I mean, here's the thing. What's going to happen here, and this gets to my theory of the exponential, right? And those slides that I like to show where the thing grows exponentially, the collective superintelligence co-evolves with the platform. As more and more people join, a certain percentage of them are going to be coders who are going to want to build a better platform. And so the exponential is just going to be incredible, right? Because this is humanity finally getting to know herself in a way, right? And, better late than never.
I think one thing that needs to be worked out somewhere down the line is the copyright issue, and the ability to share content that's available on the net. People have gone to great lengths to create content, and they know, most people that I know or that I've come into contact with, they all have one thing in common. They all want to share their content, okay? So, I mean, you or me or anybody involved in the conversation, okay, it should be easy to share content, because that's a normal thing to do as a human being, right? And okay, there are some things you might want to keep private between a small group. Yeah, that can be done anyway. You can do that, but for the most part, you want to be able to share stuff, right? It's like a co-creation, very much a co-creation, but it's a co-creation of thought too, and thinking, and we have to get through this business of copyright. Everybody hanging so tightly to the concept that should be a big deal. It's not a big deal, because most of the people they want to share their stuff, you know, and like, it should be easy enough to understand them. So,
Yeah, I like the idea of different members being able to, let's say, Emery, let's say you've put together a video that you want to share. You could schedule some time in one of the channels, right? One of the Zoom rooms within the conversation, within the network, to, maybe you show something for half an hour and then lead a conversation about it for the next half hour, something like that, right? Or maybe you do a 2-hour segment or whatever, right? But, you just schedule it, and then people in the lounge whoever's leading the lounge can direct people to that as one of the options. But I see this thing just growing like crazy. There's just going to be so many people pouring in, right? I mean, it'll be a problem, but it'll be a very good problem to have. Can you imagine people just gushing in, right? And it's like, whoa, we had to upgrade to get an account that would accommodate 1,000 people,
see,
and yeah, go ahead.
you see, the thing I'm trying to explain is that the intent here from the beginning was to start the conversation, and it's a 24/7, and it was advertised 24/7. Now, to cross into that threshold of 24/7, I'm just making the suggestion that instead of just cutting cutting out and trying to put out information now that okay, it's going to start at this time, and where are you going to add? Where are you going to post that? Well, you have your social media points of entry, right? You're going to put it on Facebook. You're going to put it Twitter. You're going to put it on, make a video, upload to whatever, YouTube. So I mean, it has to be that information in itself needs to be promoted. Then at that point, where you're making a big effort to promote and to establish, okay, this is going to happen. It's the conversation, and it's here. It's arrived. It's 24/7, and welcome. And it's been explained, and you have video on it, so people could always review the video about it, see how it functions, and people know what to expect, uh, upon that review. So there are no surprises when they come, and there's no need to explain it every time, because most people who will be coming have been exposed somewhere along that chain of information, how it's operating. Okay, there will already be a reason, an intent built up in their mind to come, and they'll have a very good idea, I think. So and obviously you don't want to have dead air. So that's where I'm suggesting to have some kind of program content when as need be. If there's the manpower and if the energy is there, fine. But as to fill positively, it's not to say that it's meaningless. These programs, these programs are very important, right? And it will be of great interest to many people, right? But at the same time, you're not going to burn out, you know. So there's no need for anybody to burn out.
Yeah. No, I do love the idea of having a video that we put on the homepage that is, here's kind of a description of exactly what to expect, and this is how it works and all that. And, what do we mean by certified compassionate? Um, hmm. Yeah, and then it's just all very clear. And but yeah, so you come into the lounge, and I like the idea if it's just kind of, if we're just kind of chilling. Like I'd still like to play some more of that Guy McPherson video, for example. I mean, this is a perfect example. Here we are chilling in the lounge. You know, we've been here for the better part of 12 hours, right? And maybe it's time to watch something for a bit. Shall we try it out? What do you guys think? All right. Yeah, I kind of want to hear this Guy
There's
McPherson.
nothing to stop us from watching anything, except if, let's say, by chance, somebody who owns the rights to that content is going to say, "Hey, don't do that," like I don't want you I don't want you using my content, even though you're not monetized and there is no monetary gain, right? Um, it's the association that would uh, get in the way. Maybe they have an attitude. They would have an attitude to an attitude against the fact that there's a linkage between their created content and what you're um, what you're representing, by your activities, you know. So there, it might be too much for them to bear, or it might be like they view it as a skewed point of view on certain things. You know what I mean? There could be a number of reasons, but like I said, I want a point where you can freely share content. People put it out there. It's in the public domain. You know, people want that shared, I think.
Yeah, well,
I,
if they put it up on YouTube, I think it's because they want it shared, right? Well, anyway, I say let's give it a try. The crows are coming back with, I wonder if that's like fish or something. I wonder if they're out fishing. Anyway, here, let me get the other computer and I'll screen share that, and we'll keep that one rolling. Oh, sure.
You want help or you good?
No, I'm good. Thanks, sweetie. Huh?
You want this little table for that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, sweetheart. Okay. And actually, if you could get me the other power cable, that'd be awesome. Yeah. Hmm? The computer power.
You need the extension for it?
No, I don't.
Oh.
I mean, I do, but I'll take care of that. I just need the power cable. That's all. Thanks, sweetheart. Okay, let me go.
I think a valuable conversation would also be as to what kind of content, like what kind of videos, like instead of like playing a video. I mean, I know we could play a video, right?
All right, guys.
But I'm sure you've got a repertory of a lot of content that you yourself have you know have
Thank you.
have put together, right? So it's I think I was trying to explain it earlier with the weightlifting thing, is to create a collection, in the time that you have, apart from the overall conversation, you could put something together which, you know, would be ready to flow. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I'm explaining it well enough.
Well, here I say we just give it a try, and if you guys are game, all right. So the long-awaited Guy McPherson video. So we're still recording. So we'll just and then, you know, anytime you guys, it's like a really good point or something like that, you guys want to talk about it, just say hey, just speak up, and I'll pause it, and we can talk about it. Sound good?
Well, that was the one that you started earlier, with
Right,
the big intro. Is that the one?
with the big long intro that we saw maybe 11 minutes of, but it's like a 21-minute intro. So we decided.
Well, that was an older video back in 2014, right?
Yeah.
It's an older one.
Correct.
You could use it as a comparison, see how much has changed since that time.
Yeah. It was a whole different time. So anyway, let's take a look, shall we? All right. Screen sharing. All right.
At the time, most of the news came from the. Thank you, Mimi. Thank you all for coming. When I was a kid, and you gotta love a story that starts like that. When I was a kid, we got most of our news from the newspaper, the local newspaper, and from television and radio. Anybody remember radios? Is it just me? Yes. All right. So, at the time, most of the news came from the Associated Press or the UPI, and they were owned by private corporations. So where do people get their news today? I know only one young person in the room. Kate, where do you get your news today?
Online versus self-declared alternative.
Okay, alternative medias. Go ahead. Chico News and Review. I've heard of that one. Over here. Wherever, internet, Awesome, NPR, BBC, and comedians who make fun of the news, the so-called news. So there aren't that many sources, and how many people think that the important news, 100% of it is given to you by the media you look at? 100% of the important news actually comes to you through the media you look at. I got to get your media list. How many people think 90%? 80%?
Put your hand up.
Scratch any cynic and you'll uncover a disappointed idealist. I see a lot of cynicism here. That's awesome. That's a George Carlin quote, by the way. 60%? 50%? Now we're getting there. 40%? 30%? Of the important news, do you think 20% is provided by the media? 10%? How about
What do you guys say, James and Emery?
5%.
Melissa says 5%. Sorry, James?
We get about 1% here in Ireland, I'd say.
1%. Okay.
That's where I was headed.
Very good. All righty. But see, this is the kind of thing we can do. We just pause and talk about it, and then, you know, it makes it interactive. So even though we're hanging out in the lounge, you know, we're talking about interesting stuff. All right. Continuing.
none? So I didn't ever question the news. When I was a kid, it was pretty amazing. And Even when I was into my 20s, I never thought that the media would actually be misrepresenting what was going on or not telling the whole story. And so clearly there's people in the audience far wiser than me today, much less at that age. Well, if that's true for all the news, what about environmental news? Do you think the same holds true? Of course. If the media are not telling the whole story about what's going on with the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, then perhaps they're not telling the whole story about how clean our air is and how clean our water is, and the costs and consequences of maintaining the set of living arrangements, and maybe about climate change as well. So maybe everything you hear from the media is not the whole story, even if you have your ear really to the ground and are paying careful attention to a bunch of media outlets, including the alternative ones, the less than mainstream ones. Our species has been around for 250,000 years. Humans have been around for 2.5 million years, but our species has been here for 250,000 years. One indigenous perspective is provided by the Iroquois Confederacy, which practiced that every significant act would be taken in light of what was going to happen 7 generations down the road. Can you imagine 7 generations today? It's hard for us to imagine 7 minutes. Oh wait, I think I got a text. I'll be right with you. Right? I mean, that's our attention span. We're Twitter nation. Really a Twitter world. If it doesn't happen in 140 characters, I really don't have time for that. I'm surprised you're all still here. So we gave up on the idea of 7 generations quite a while ago. We started, I think for a lot of people, climate change became something real, something that hit the media and was to pay attention to when Al Gore came on the stage in about 2007. Right? So 2007, people realized, hey, this might be serious. We maybe need to do something about this with Al Gore. And then 350.org was born in 2009, and trying to convince people that we can do the impossible. I don't think we're going to do that, by the way, because it's actually impossible to get 350 parts per million by mid-century, as 350.org claims. Actually, the heating associated with the current level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is just a little bit under 400 parts per million, is locked in for at least the next 1,000 years. That according to a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences from February 2009.
Now that's if you don't factor in SRM, right? He's just talking about the retention of heat based on the solar energy that makes it through the greenhouse gases and the solar dimming aerosol mass. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the long wave radiation that's getting in is not getting back out because of the global warming, the masking or the masking effect, so I should say. But yeah, exactly. How much changes in a couple of years? Like he now actually advocates for Yato's SRM himself and put you in contact with him. Like, so theoretically, he said, and the physics say it will work. So I mean, he's the top man in this field. But again, it's what he started off with. The mainstream media, the news, it's all controlled. How much can you believe? It's up to us.
Well,
Right. And by us I mean these all platforms and everybody else that are coming in on the lounge now. It's up to the people on the street, on the people on the ground. And I think the people on the ground this year alone, 2020, above any year in history, 2020 has shown the people on the ground that they're on their own. That the people in power, that they elected into government to represent, to be there for the people, you know what I mean, to represent the people and to, you know, make the life better for the people. They don't do that anymore, like, you know what I mean? They do not do that anymore. The people no longer come into the equation with these people anymore. We're on our own, and we see that now. Everybody sees that anyone on the street sees that now. We're on our own, so it is up to us.
I think that the concept that he was trying to get over was that the damage is locked in. A lot of the damage is locked in to the
Yeah, it was locked in. It was locked in 2014, though, Emery. And now without SRM, 6 years later, Guy McPherson realizes that even though it's locked in, and even though a lot more has been locked in those last 6 years, with SRM, we can now prevent further locking in, help to cool down the planet straight away, and bring the degree temperature down in the Arctic to help so that there won't be an ice-free Arctic soon. And once we get that temperature to a moderate level, where we can, you know, reverse or stop at least the build-up, we then, in the meantime, come up with which they're saying, come up with the technologies. I know, but it's better at least we're talking about something that's going to bring the temperature down and hold it off for a while they come up with drawdown technologies and everything else, and while we figure out other ways of dealing with energy without the fossil fuel industry. It's as simple as that. It's our only way out of it. But we can't do drawdown. You can't do green energy on its own isn't going to work until you cool the whole lot down. So even Guy McPherson is, 6 years later on from that video, he actually is, advocating for it. But as he says himself, and he said it himself in the presentation with Jim and Yetau, he said the science says that it's there, the physics, the math. I see that it is a possibility. But for 3 things, he said. Nobody knows about it. The general population don't know about it. Lack of government support, and therefore lack of finances. Because without government support, you don't have finances. And without the people knowing what's going on, you're never going to get government support. So we're in a conundrum. So it's up to us and it's up to the groups that keep coming in here and get this evolving to get the wider population and the people on the ground to know what the truth is. There is a way around it. It can at least be tackled instead of just letting it, consume us without even putting our eyes up to see what's coming.
The consumption is all of the debatable issues that surround each and every possible operation that falls under SRM. I mean, there's so many different processes, and they're all open for discussion and debate. So, and a lot of this discussion and debate is not fully available to the general population. It's hidden, and the government surely doesn't talk about it, and they're not advised to the full extent that they should be, and they're not educated to the full extent that they need be. So there's a lot of room for much error. Great errors are being made. Time is being wasted. So the confidence level that one has for a successful deployment, is very, 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 very low. So that's what we have to overcome. We have to build up. We have to build up the confidence in the facts that we can establish that are positive towards the actual cooling and the different processes that can be brought into existence and operation.
All righty. Great discussion. Shall I keep on playing the video? All right, here goes.
Is this the first time you're watching this video, Jamin, or have you seen this particular video?
This is the first time.
It's a good one.
And it looks like it's a multi-part series because this is part one.
Yeah, I mean, she's excellent, and you know. Go ahead.
All right, here goes.
We actually knew that before 350.org took their first significant action in the fall of that year. So maybe even everything you hear from 350.org isn't quite right. An organization funded by the Rockefellers or Big Oil, as we've come to know them. Okay, what I'm going to do today is give a very cursory overview of anthropogenic climate change. This will be an introduction to a topic I'll talk about Thursday at the same time, same place? Same time, same place, 2 days from today, when I'll start moving into abrupt climate change. So today I'm just going to talk about anthropogenic climate change, how we triggered it, what it might mean for our future. And then Thursday I'm going to dig into the considerably more dire information that Mimi hinted at when she's talking about numbers like 4 degrees C and 6 degrees C. Those numbers are truly catastrophic, by the way. In the 2.5 million years of the human experience, we have not had a planet that was 3.5 degrees centigrade above baseline. And so when people start throwing about numbers like 4C and 6C within a matter of decades, that's serious stuff. This is not just, oh, we'll take off the jacket. This is not just we'll turn on the air conditioner kind of stuff. This is really serious stuff. But before we go there, I want to give just a relatively brief overview of anthropogenic climate change in a pretty general sense. And I don't think it'll take very long. And that will give us plenty of time for a discussion, or at least questions, and maybe even some answers. Humble Oil was the predecessor of ExxonMobil, currently the largest oil company in the world. And in 1962, in Life magazine, Humble Oil bragged that each day they provided enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glacier. Woo! Awesome. I mean, nobody would do this today, right? This is ridiculous. Nobody would connect melting glaciers all over the world with burning fossil fuels. But in 1962, it was kind of a different world, right? We didn't know much about climate change, at least as a society. Fast forward just a few years, and we have an article in Natural Gas Intelligence, and the headline reads, "Climate Change a Top Priority," says ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson. 52 years after Humble Oil brags, its successor ExxonMobil says, oh, this is serious stuff. Yes, it is. The mechanism behind carbon dioxide or burning fossil fuels, the mechanism behind burning fossil fuels and overall warming of the planet, thereby producing climate changes. So anthropogenic global warming leads to climate change. That mechanism has been understood since Sir John Tyndall's famous lecture in 1863, published a few years later in his book. So we've known about this for a long time. I'm going to focus on the science of climate change here. I am not going to spend much time on models because, as George Box reported in his book, his 1976 book, and this is a modeler and statistician, George Box, all models are wrong. And he points out that adding increased complexity to the models doesn't make them any more likely to be right. So I'm going to focus on the real data, the data from observation, not from models. According to the U.S. National Center for Science Education, a couple of years ago, science education is under attack by climate change deniers who are trying to sabotage science education. And in fact, it's a billion-dollar industry. Science denial from the likes of the Koch brothers, for example, is a billion-dollar industry. So small wonder, since the corporations own the media and arguably the governments, small wonder we aren't hearing the whole story. It's a corporate media. There's a handful of companies that own 90+% of the media information most people receive. Well, it's not in the best interest of those corporations to point out that burning fossil fuels threatens our very existence. Now is it? I mean, that's like telling a terminal cancer patient that you have 5 days to live, oh, and you better buy a bunch of stuff in those 5 days because the only way to be happy is to buy a bunch of stuff. Right, so the corporations are not going to try to continue to sell us a bunch of stuff and tell us that we're terminal, are they? So there might be a vested interest here. So again, it's a billion-dollar a year industry, as reported in one of the premier journals in the discipline of climate change.
I'm going to pause that for a second. I just want to see that slide.
So there might be a vested interest here.
Organizations that actively block efforts to address climate change are funded by a large network of conservative donors to the tune of nearly $1 billion a year. Oh my goodness. That is incredible. Wow. Okay.
So again, it's a billion-dollar a year industry, as reported in one of the premier journals in the discipline of climate change. From the last year, we have the information accumulated. 2013, there were 10,885 peer-reviewed journals that deal with climate. 2 of those rejected the idea of anthropogenic climate change. The little red sliver is magnified 5 times so that you can see it. So according to the science, it's not 97%, it's 99.999%, according to the published science, that climate change is anthropogenic in origin. And we know what's going on. This again comes from Sir John Tyndall in 1863 in his famous lecture, and then from his 1872 book. There's a bunch of sunlight that hits the earth. Some of it is reflected back out into space, some becomes heat. Some of that heat, primarily in the form of long-wave radiation, is trapped by the atmosphere. So the planet keeps getting a bunch of radiation coming in, a bunch of solar energy, and when we produce carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases such as methane and chlorofluorocarbons and so on, and even water vapor, which occurs naturally up there, those trap the heat. So the more of those we have up there, the more the heat gets trapped. So it's like putting on extra blankets at night. So it all works brilliantly up to a point. I mean, if it weren't for the greenhouse effect, we wouldn't be here. Right? We wouldn't have an atmosphere that was habitable by humans. So if it weren't for the so-called greenhouse effect, we wouldn't be able to survive on this planet at all. But by exacerbating the greenhouse effect, what we have done is pile on a bunch more blankets, so it keeps the heat in. Or to use another analogy, if you leave your car parked in the parking lot, all the windows are rolled down, and you go outside on a day like today, it's as cold inside as it is outside, which is pretty chilly. So you start driving down the road, you don't get very far before you're rolling up the windows because it's cold out there. And so you roll up the windows, don't turn on the heater, don't turn on the air conditioner, and pretty soon it's warm in there, isn't it? And that's the greenhouse effect. Your car really shouldn't be called a car, it's a greenhouse on wheels. That's the whole story. You get all that radiation coming in, and some of the long wave radiation can't escape, so it warms up the car. So if we look at the average annual temperature of the Earth, that's shown in the upper graph here, and the decadal average in the lower half, you can see that things are happening. And it's particularly obvious in the decadal average as it goes up every single decade. So the temperature anomalies are really starting to take off, and that doesn't look like it's a particularly linear arrangement.
again, I'm going to pause. I just want to see like how much is it jumping per decade, degrees C. So it's on the order of 0.2 per decade. Boom, boom, boom. That's what we're seeing here on the decadal average, as he calls it. All right, carrying on.
The decadal average as it goes up every single decade. So the temperature anomalies are really starting to take off, and that doesn't look like it's a particularly linear arrangement anymore when we look at that bottom curve. Now, it might have been able to draw a line through this thing up to here, but whoa, then all of a sudden things are really taking off. So what we're looking at now is not necessarily linear change. It's abrupt climate change. I'm going to talk more about that on Thursday and also at the other events to come while I'm here. So we're at a human record high for carbon dioxide levels. They didn't exceed 300 parts per million for the last 650 years. They were about 280 parts per million, maybe a little lower at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, say 1750. And so now they're really starting to take off. Now they're at 400 parts per million. They haven't been there for the last 20 million years. We've had something resembling humans on the planet for 2.5 million years. 8 times that long, we haven't had carbon dioxide levels this high. This is a tremendously large number. And there's no stop. When we just add on one more greenhouse gas, methane in the atmosphere is far more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. Molecule for molecule, about 100 times more powerful in the short term. 100 times. Just add on the 750 parts per billion of methane in the atmosphere, and we're at about 580 parts per million equivalent of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. What's interesting about that is, in a Referee Journal article years ago, James Hansen and colleagues pointed out that somewhere between 300 and 350 parts per million carbon dioxide was truly dangerous. We get up to 350, and this is where 350.org came from. We get over 350, and we know that's a death sentence. Not necessarily for relatively rich Caucasian people living in the Northern Hemisphere, but for other people, 350 parts per million is a death sentence. The small island states, in particular in the Pacific. Sub-Saharan Africa, 5 million people die early deaths every year because of climate change already. People ask me all the time, when is climate change going to be obvious? Well, if you're in the families of those 5 million, it's already pretty obvious. So methane added on to carbon dioxide indicates that things are getting real and in a hurry. 350 parts per million. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, set as 350 the number that we really need to get back to quite a long time ago. And then they ratcheted that up and said 400 was the dangerous mark. And then they ratcheted that up more recently and said 450 is the dangerous mark. It's a shifting baseline. It was dangerous a long time ago, 350 parts per million. And now we're at the equivalent of nearly 600 parts per million by just tacking on methane. It's dangerous. It's catastrophic. The media are not telling you because the media don't tell us everything we need to know. In a controlled environment, and you've probably heard this before, carbon dioxide is actually good for plants. And you go into any greenhouse and the carbon dioxide level is quite high. Well, if you're able to remove constraints such as water and nutrients by providing perfect soil and lots of water for the plants growing in these controlled environments, then indeed when you add carbon dioxide it helps, because you're overcoming that barrier for which carbon dioxide can enter the leaves through the stomates of the plants. So you make that barrier a little steeper, make that boundary a little steeper so there's more carbon dioxide so it gets in there so the plants are able to fix more of that carbon and grow faster. But that assumes that everything else is working out just fine, that you're providing enough nutrients and the soil is awesome and the water is getting in there. But according to Pentagon spokesman Mark Wright, the scientific forecast is for more intense storms, more flooding from storm surge, and more drought. In the real world, we aren't just changing one thing. When we increase carbon dioxide, we get more intense storms, more flooding from storm surge, and more drought. We're not just changing one thing, we're changing everything. If it were only carbon dioxide going up and the water relations were all remaining the same, then it wouldn't be much of a problem what we're facing. But we live in this world. Even according to Fox News, extreme forecast is dead on in 2012. It's in December 2012, hot and either too dry or too wet, just as experts warned. So even the occasional mistake from the mainstream media reveals the truth. That the experts have warned us that climate change is real and that it's here now. According to a paper in Nature, and I think this is the oldest refereed journal article I'll point out today, Atlantic hurricane power dissipation has been more than doubled in the last 30 years. So when we add those actual biological constraints, we get more extreme events, and that's not necessarily good for growth of plants. And of course, plants underlie the whole thing. If the plants aren't growing, we don't have anything to eat. So again, in the actual environment with biological constraints, phytoplankton have declined, and that has been attributed to an increased acidification of the ocean. So what you see on top there is carbon dioxide going up with the expected and now well-described annual signal demonstrated by the red line, and the carbon dioxide in surface seawater bouncing around quite a bit, but in general going up, and as a consequence, pH going down. So the ocean has acidified 30% within the last few decades. 30%. That doesn't sound like much, but it's a huge number because every organism on the planet has evolved through natural selection to a particular environment, to the environment where it's found, as it turns out. So if you change the environment where the organisms are found, that's a big deal. The rate of climate change is progressing more than 10,000 times faster than evolution can keep up. 10,000 times faster. So when you change the acidification, when you increase the acid level of the environment 30% in a short period of time, that's not good for things that are trying to survive. The trend is expected to accelerate, of course, so that phytoplankton could disappear altogether. Sounds like it's no big deal, but phytoplankton form the base of the marine food web. That's half the food we eat. Half. The other half comes from land plants, and it's no pretty picture there either. Let's just look nearby. Number of foggy days in Central Valley has declined more than 40% since 1980. Since 1980. And fog is really a big deal for fruits and nuts. Last winter, whereas the average number of foggy days in Central California was 37 in 1980 and before 1980, the number of foggy days last winter was 2. 2. So we have fruits and nuts that are well adapted to fog, and we take away the fog, guess what happens to the fruits and nuts? It's not just fruits and nuts, it's grains, which provide an enormous amount of food that people eat on this planet. Grains grown at elevated atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations in the real world, in large-scale experiments, have reduced nutrition, most notably including protein. And what we see here, the horizontal line is the 0 mark, and the dots represent what happens at increased atmospheric carbon dioxide. What you see across the bottom are the names of the varieties. So there are 8 varieties of wheat there, and every single one of them, the change is negative when grown at elevated atmospheric carbon dioxide. And those are percent changes shown, and it's on average about 10 to 15% reduction in productivity of wheat. And the same for rice, every single variety of rice. Well, that accounts for a lot of the food people eat on this planet. And so what this means is you have to eat more wheat and more rice to get the same level of nutrition. And it's not as if people in the first world aren't eating enough already. So eating more to get the same level of nutrition means we're all going to go around looking like Twinkie butts by the end of the week. The only cases in which increased carbon dioxide didn't make a significant difference are the species on the right, including soybeans and maize or corn. There's no statistically significant difference there. So not enough to matter. But this is a tremendous amount of the food supply. So we talked about fruits, nuts, phytoplankton at the base of the marine food web. We're talking about grains now, and none of it looks particularly good for growing plants. And adverse weather conditions for wheat production will become more frequent with climate change, of course. So things keep getting worse. And it's not as if we haven't been warned. George Perkins Marsh, the American naturalist and ambassador, a combination you almost never hear about anymore. Ambassadors never come from the natural sciences, right? They're always attorneys. American naturalist and ambassador George Perkins Marsh warned that burning fossil fuels would cause Earth's climate to change. And in particular will cause a warming of the planet. This is 1847, before we started scaling things up with respect to fossil fuel burning. Svante Arrhenius put the first referee journal article together that pointed out the same thing, predicting 1 degree sea temperature increase by the year 2000. Came within a quarter of a degree, by the way. Not bad, 104 years in advance. Guy Callender actually put some numbers on this and demonstrated with a hand-drawn graph in 1938 what the consequences have been so far with respect to overall warming of the planet. And you can see that we crossed the Rubicon in about 1915, and we've never hit a below average year since about that time. It just keeps getting warmer and warmer, and that's through 1938. And things get really interesting after that, of course. According to NOAA, the last below average temperature for any month was February 1985. You would expect that to happen every other month or so. Every month has a 50% chance of being slightly below average, slightly above average. Last time we had a slightly below average month, February 1985, before almost anybody in this room was born. All you've ever known is a warmed planet. You don't know a normal planet. 100% of the warming of the last 60 years results from human activity, according to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in their vaunted fifth assessment, officially released this year but heavily leaked starting in September of last year. Contrary to the contrarian myth that warming has paused since 1997, it's actually accelerated, and we know now where the heat has been going. It's been going into the ocean. Between 0 and 700 meters primarily, and that's the light blue in the upper part. And you can find 1997 there at the bottom, and you can see that the heating has accelerated since that time. It looks like an exponential increase in heating. The ocean represents about 2/3, 3/4 of the total surface area of the planet. So putting heat in there is a big deal. Temperature change has not been a result of solar activity. Temperature is shown on the top in the red. Solar activity is shown on the bottom in the blue. You can see solar activity peaked in 1960 and has been stable to declining since then when temperature has skyrocketed. It's been warm before, this we know. When the Earth comes out of an ice age, the warming is not initiated by carbon dioxide, but by changes in the Earth's orbit, and in particular the Milankovitch cycle. And this warming, due to the change in the wobble of the Earth, causes the oceans to release carbon dioxide. Ooh, that's when things get interesting, because carbon dioxide, just like when you roll up the windows in your car, the carbon dioxide in there starts to warm things. It does it quickly when you're in your car because it's a little space. It does it more gradually, more slowly when it's planet Earth because it's a big space. In other words, carbon dioxide causes warming, and the subsequent rise in temperature causes carbon dioxide to increase. So it's a feedback loop between carbon dioxide and temperature. About 90% of the global warming comes after the increase in carbon dioxide. The wobble gets things started, but then carbon dioxide is the real culprit behind 90% of the warming. What that looks like is this, with the dots and the red line up there on top, indicating carbon dioxide, and the temperature coming out of the Holocene, indicated by the blue band there on the bottom. So there's something of a lag. The lag can be relatively short. There was a year period, 55 million years ago, in which global average temperature increased 5 degrees centigrade in 13 years. So it need not take thousands of years from release of a greenhouse gas, in that case it was methane, until the temperature rises significantly. Arctic ice extent and volume are both decreasing. You can see the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is about 1750. Well, look what happens in about the early 1800s when we started burning fossil fuels at scale. All of a sudden the ice went into free fall in the Arctic. And more recently, since 1979, that decline has been sustained. There's a record-setting year in 2012 shown here, and since then the ice has recovered in both 2013 and 2014. 2014 was the 6th lowest year in history for the Arctic sea ice. Arctic sea ice is important. That's the planet's air conditioner. And so when we get rid of that ice, it really causes things to warm up. And we're seeing that already. Antarctic ice volume is decreasing as well. You hear a lot about how it's snowing more in the Antarctic, and that must be making up for the fact that we're losing ice in the Arctic, and that's just not the case. Antarctic ice volume is decreasing. There is increased cover in some places, increased sea extent in Antarctica, but it's a thin layer of ice and snow. And the loss of sea ice in Antarctica during a relatively recent period, the last 13 years through when we have the most recent data, was double that than during the previous time. So the acceleration is continuing even in the largest ice mass on the continent. So we've had the warning since 1847. We've understood the mechanism since 1863. Food production.
Hey guys, I just need to pause for a second to check in with Melissa.
I'll just add something. Welcome, so joined us.
Hey, so welcome back.
Hi, Jamin, do you remember I invited Solar Tony to come over, and he kept breaking up on the thing. He was talking for a long time, and then he kept breaking up. Do you remember?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've just been to a session of his, right, on permaculture. He's a professor in solar voltaics and stuff like that. And it was quite tedious before because he was talking for a long time. He didn't really seem to know, when to come in. That was probably my fault because I said, why don't you come along and give a talk? And, so, it was my fault the way I'd set it up really. But, so it was very tedious because he kept breaking up. Remember that time, and it, went on a long time. But he'd be really good. I think if so, Carol, ask him again, because he's very nice speaker, and really informed with very good style as well. So what slot do you think that could go in?
Let's see.
And he's a smashing kind of professor as well, because he won a big UN prize or something, and something to do with UNESCO and all that. And but he's got that nice on the level kind of tone, not like, oh, I'm the big professor. He hasn't got any of that. And he laughs a lot. But he's really interesting and so knowledgeable. Yeah, so it would be really good.
And what's his specialty again? So you said like photovoltaic.
He invented this way of doing solar panels and that, but it's sustainability. So he's got, he's got the professor thing, but he's got lots of a huge amount of other letters and stuff to do with other stuff. But the point is, he's a very clear speaker, and he's interesting, and he's, you know, and he's knowledgeable with very interesting stuff that would suit, you know, that we'd all appreciate listening to. You know, because it's about permaculture and sustainability and all the planet stuff, you know. He's an engineer like you, sustainability engineer.
I presume he'd be very much interested in the SRM project then, and may have some input in that too.
Yeah, he's well up on all those kind of things, what's going on now, but he's very real about stuff, you know, and deeper. So what do you think? Shall I invite him?
Definitely, and he's always invited, always welcome to join the conversation. And in terms of presenting, we would just need to figure out when a good slot would be.
Because I'd like a permaculture slot, because, you know, Benjamin and Susanna, they've been involved in permaculture, and I'm sure I've heard other people, you know, talking about the permaculture thing on here that were really interesting as well. But Tony is really good. It's a really nice presentation, and if we say a set amount of time, you know, so that it's a bit more structured, and that was really my fault last time. I didn't really, and then that awful thing of it.
Yeah. So I would say for the block party, now is he there in England?
No,
Sorry?
he's in California.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's easy. Okay. Then I would say the easiest slot of time generally would be from between 1 and 3 Pacific time. Right?
Okay, but
So that would start at 9 o'clock your time, PM. So, yeah, and it's that would be if it was the block party. If it was during the Solution Club, it could be.
it's very solution oriented.
Yeah, and I would say
Of like a permaculture group, and maybe if I'll ask him if he could kick it off with the talk, and then, you know, if he talks for it, because he's interesting. That's the thing. Last time I was like, I think I've made a bad move here, but it was all the way I did it. Absolutely, because he's great. He's really good.
yeah, and how long of a presentation would you recommend? So.
Well, I'd happily listen to him for 2 hours, but as we no, I'd say about 35 minutes. No, that was probably not long enough to get. I don't know. Maybe 45, and then people jumping in, or maybe do it in, you know, talk for 20 minutes. Another 20 minutes. I don't know, but you probably know that, how that works.
Yeah. Well, why don't we?
We'll chat with people, and he spoke for a long time. You know, it depends, doesn't it? On but he was very engaging.
Yeah. So I would just ask that you make sure that you have a good internet connection, so that we don't have choppiness or breaking up or anything like that. And maybe, you know, start off with a 1 hour slot, see how it goes, right?
Yeah, and he can experiment with Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I would say, you know, I would ask that he do a test beforehand to make sure that he can present and screen share.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, and that he have good, you know, good enough bandwidth, high enough bandwidth.
Yeah, it's just useless otherwise, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah.
It's just tedious otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So you two, did you say 2 and 3, 9 o'clock my time?
Yeah, but it could be I would say it could be like 1 to 2 or maybe 2 to 3. Yeah, 2 to 3 would probably be the safest time. So that would be
Is that specific?
yeah,
What's it called?
2 to 3 in the afternoon if it's the block party, right? Pacific time.
Is that California time?
That's right.
2
That's
to 3.
that's California time. Yeah, exactly.
2 to 3 in the afternoon, block party. Okay, I'll put it.
So you want to do that? So okay, so you'll send me an email to let me know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
See what he's doing next Friday.
Okay, great.
So getting back to Guy.
Yeah. So
you notice how, you know, he brought in the term abrupt in this particular video that we were watching. Now, since that time, his line now is abrupt, irreversible. So he's added the word irreversible, you know, to the same concept that he was explaining there. So situation's gotten worse, as it was always on track to do.
I've noticed in the news, like the climate and the time we've got to edge, you know, almost by the week closer to the truth, and it's all happened during the news. A sea change has sort of happened during this lockdown period, but every week it's like they nudge it a little bit closer to how dire it is, and it is about sort of like 3 years recently. 3 years, you know, nobody knows. We don't know. It could be 10, it could be 20, but you know, it's the feedback loops, isn't it? The sudden and the methane time bomb and what's happening in Siberia. I mean, that's scary with the permafrost.
Yeah, it's I'd say it's happening faster than we can make sense of it. And I point to the videos. I don't know if it was James or Emery who shared those extreme weather videos that showed, like, you know, 20-minute video, all the extreme weather from the previous month or something like that. And just, you know, I think it's happening faster than we can make sense of it. Right.
And those are there are a collection of videos every month on YouTube, and it's under the heading Strange Events. And just put in Strange Events, with April 2020, and it will come up for April. And, you know, every month preceding that as well. And it's horrifying to look back even to that, because I've been following that since, well, a full year of every month I've been watching that. And to see the escalation in the last year, since prior to the Australian fires, to see the escalation of what's happening. And by the escalation, you know, I mean, a lot of it is natural, but a lot of it's climate related, more violent climate is what I'd say, more violent weather. But a lot of it then as well is, you know, you could see it straight away that it's brought on by our human intervention, and that's just even sadder again. Like, so, but yeah, people are just not aware of any of that. That's why that channel is out there, to let people know, because none of this has been shown on the mainstream media. You have to search it out yourself. So, Strange Events, April 2020, or whatever month you want to choose.
Hey,
James,
James,
the people around you, do they want to know those things before? Do they actually want to know? Or do you just not want to, you know, what's going on in your little circle?
are you getting a clear audio, James?
You know, when I hear James, I hear this very high pitch kind of background.
Me too. It's very, very
Yeah,
high pitch,
yeah, yeah.
squeaking, creaking, and I mean, for some reason, Soul's audio is just horrible.
Yeah, so your audio it breaks up and the volume kind of
I know what it, because I went over to Google Chrome. I'll change it.
Anyway, is my audio okay? Yeah.
You-
Do I
you're-
talk?
yeah, yours.
Do I talk? Do I
yours-
speak too loud?
No, I mean you could speak a little softer, I guess, but it's
Okay.
it's quite clear.
Okay. Just to know, because I have no clue sometimes.
I could do with a bit of feedback there, so as well, I don't know whether I'm too loud or if I'm coming through.
Yeah, yours is really hard. It's like hard on the ears, James. It's like this high pitch. You know, it's kind of like yeah, it's just this very high pitch. I don't know if any way you can change your microphone from, you know, a headset to the phone or something, but if any change, I'm sure would be helpful.
It's the paranormal.
Yeah, it's a paranormal phenomenon.
No,
You know what I suspect. I suspect it's climate related, because these long waves, these waves rays from the sun, they're pretty funky. You know, they mess with everything. I mean, it was unbearable today for me. Once again, I'm going through a major heat wave over here in Montreal. It's just unbearable, unbearable.
And is it hot and humid?
It's just hot, hot. You know, and I mean, it's not to say one couldn't regulate this with air conditioning, but the air conditioning is is way below any kind of standard you may imagine. So it's nothing. You know, everybody's in a different situation, I guess. You know, if you've got the funds, you can set yourself to be nice and cool. You know, be nice and clever about your situation, right?
Right. How's my volume down on my sound? Any screechiness?
No, the screechiness is all gone. It's way better, way better.
Perfect.
Right. Okay, sorry about that. That was just my own laziness. I wasn't using the earphones because it's a bit awkward with the one hand, and you know, it restricts me from moving as well when I want to make tea. But anyway, it's just laziness, so I'll keep them in from now on.
We caught you. We
Can
caught you.
can you tell me what mine sounds like now? Is mine okay now?
It's better, so it's better. But you know, we'll just have to listen to you for a bit to get a good sample size.
Well, that's the first time I've really understood you there now tonight, since you came back on there a while ago. So it's much better for me anyway.
My what I was going to ask you, Emery, very
Pardon?
high.
No, you're gone again. So you're gone again.
Hey, talking to me. So what did you say?
just asked if you had very high humidity? Because, you know, the big danger is the wet bulb temperatures, isn't it? You know, whether great and our organs.
Well, the big danger for me is I'm limited to how much liquids I can take per day. You know, so even though I want to you know, take in liquids, I'm not doing myself any favors because it disrupts the health of my heart. So my heart can't, you know, shouldn't have to deal with the added liquids, you know, and that's what I'm fighting.
What kind of what, did you have some special condition?
All righty. So what do we want to do? Do we want to watch some more of the Guy McPherson video? Or
Yeah, why not? Might as well finish it off.
Sure, sure. Okay, here goes. And I think I'll mute my microphone just because sometimes we get some noises going on here. But
I wanted to ask you something, Jamin.
Yeah. When
you're sharing, you only see the page that you're only seeing the page that you're sharing, right? You don't see any of the Zoom
actually
chat. Do you see the chat at all?
Yeah, I can see the chat, and I can also see thumbnail, you know, videos of, you know, whoever else is in the room. So yeah, I can see that all. I have access to it all. But I'll just mute my microphone. So then if I want to say something, I'll just I have to get out of screen share to unmute. So
Right.
yeah. Okay. All right. So but please chime in if you want me to pause or make a point or anything, as often as you want. Just say, "Hey, Jamin, pause." Okay. All right, sharing now.
In the real world, with real biological constraints, declines with increased atmospheric carbon dioxide. Warming has accelerated. There's been no pause, contrary to the notion. This warming has been in the opposite direction of solar activity. Past warming events are largely due to an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide after the initiation of the event coming out of ice ages of the Earth's wobble, and the Arctic and Antarctic ice are both melting. So that's the Climate Change 101 story in a nutshell, and we have ample time for questions and maybe even an answer. And I'll extend the discussion and the conversation into the much more interesting topic of abrupt climate change, as in it's a problem for the grandchildren. And I heard that when I was a grandchild. And now look, I'm all grown up. It's a problem for today. And it goes beyond problem. So we'll talk more about that on Thursday. At this point, please give me your questions, your comments, your own version of reality. Yes, all the way in the back.
I have a question about the graph that you showed where there was a little increase in 2012. What happens there?
So this is Arctic sea ice, and it's been in decline, and it hit an all-time record in 2012 for low level of Arctic ice volume, and then it recovered slightly in 2013. It also recovered in 2014, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's actually right there in September of this year. And you see, that's what happens through time. The trend is down, but look, even after a catastrophic collapse in 1980 and 1981, there's a recovery for a couple of years. And then there'll be another collapse and a little recovery. So there's been a collapse, pretty significant collapse, and there's been a recovery for a couple of years. This is random noise, okay? As the Arctic ice death spiral continues, there will be some recovery. There will be some noise in the system. And we don't understand why all that noise happens. But the trend is not in a favorable direction. The UK Parliament predicted an ice-free Arctic for at least a few days of the year in 2015. The US Naval Postgraduate School predicted 2016. Those might be a little premature, but in any event, I can't imagine we'll have an Arctic Ocean completely covered in ice year-round by 2020. And that's truly catastrophic and dire. That has never happened in the human experience. So that's a big deal.
And the other question I had was, when you said that it's already affecting the deaths of many third world countries and sub-Saharan Africa in particular, that's drought related? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, mostly it's drought related. Here in Northern California, there are still hundreds of people who haven't had water coming through the taps for several months now because the aquifer is dropping. Do you blame that on climate change? I came over what used to be a lake this morning on my way here from Ashland, Oregon, and there's no lake there anymore. I think that's because of two things. Because we're sucking on the straw, and we keep sucking on the straw, and because there's been no recharge. And the aquifers date back to the Pleistocene. So that's 2 million year old water there that only within the last 100 years we started sucking out of the ground, and nobody's thinking about stopping. So both of those, the root of both of those is industrial civilization. So if you're looking for an ultimate cause, I think that's where the cause lies. So it's water, it's food, it's starvation, it's too hot. So far, it hasn't been, in almost any cases, a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees centigrade or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point the body just can't thermoregulate. Large mammals like us, even if you're in a shower, spraying cold water, when the wet bulb temperature is 95 degrees, we die in a matter of hours. So far that hasn't been the case, but at some point in the not too distant future, it's likely to occur, especially in tropical and subtropical regions near the coast, because of the high humidity there. Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is true, but I know that in the long term we got to decrease our carbon emissions, methane emissions, et cetera, but isn't there a way to increase the amount of ice that are on the ice caps with chemical solutions? I think I saw a couple when I was in chemistry class in high school, and also is it possible that for a short-term thing to delay the race of the Arctic ice?
Is it possible to add ice to the Arctic through some chemical means? Is that an appropriate summary of the question?
For a short-term goal.
Yeah, for a short-term goal. Nothing I know about that can be done at scale. If so, it would require a tremendous amount of energy, fossil energy that is running short at this point. And it would require the sort of coordinated effort I don't see happening at this point. So I don't know that the technology exists. If so, it was not written about in the IPCC's fifth assessment that came out this year. If it does exist, I don't know of anybody who's thinking about implementing it. At least I've never heard about it.
This year I was reading about a young man in college who created a device that if you place into the ocean, what it's supposed to do on large scale, resources is lower than City and improved it as of this year. But I don't know if it's going anywhere, but I don't know if anyone in the scientific community would be interested in that.
So the point is that there was a college student earlier this year who produced a device that would decrease the acidity of the ocean, make it more alkaline, with a relatively simple technological fix.
But it has to be on a large scale.
Right, and
On small scale, but large
right.
scale.
So he demonstrated this at a large scale. It would have to be scaled up. Is anybody interested? I don't know. I don't see any. As nearly as I can tell, nobody is interested. Nobody who's pulling the levers of industry is interested in anything beyond money. When greed is your only god, sociopaths assume control.
You think that fishermen would be interested in it?
Well, of course, you would think anybody who eats would be actually interested in it. Does that mean it's going to happen? Well, there aren't very many people who are actually running the show. It doesn't really matter who you vote for, because the people who you vote for respond to the corporations. It's a corporate media, it's a corporate government. Your vote is largely irrelevant in this system. Sorry to burst your idealistic college bubble, but that's the way I see it in any event. All the way in the back?
Taking into consideration all of this information and the trajectory of things going to this largely student audience that are here getting an education from everything from nursing to engineering to welding to social sciences that are here for a few years and maybe going on. What is your best advice to today's college students going into the world at this time in our history?
You get right to the heart. You're killing me. I was trying to save some of the good stuff for Thursday. The best advice I have for anybody at any time comes from the Buddha, more than 2.5 millennia ago. The trouble is, you think there's time. Seize the day. To quote Nietzsche, live as though the day were here. Live here now. My whole life, I planned for a future that never came. So I continue to floss my teeth. Don't get me wrong. Edward Abbey was something of a hero of mine. Edward Abbey was an iconoclastic writer based in Tucson, Arizona for most of his life. And when he was given a terminal diagnosis, I think at the age of 54, his first response, he was told he had weeks to live in 1982. And his initial response from the doctor was, well, I guess I don't have to floss my teeth anymore. And 7 years later, when he finally died, he had the shittiest looking teeth you've ever seen. And so I encourage you to floss your teeth and to live every day, to live here now, to be here, to be present, to be fully present with wherever you're at, to spend time with people that you enjoy spending time with, to try to make the world a better place, but don't get too attached to the outcome of the world becoming a better place. My entire life, I have heard that the world has been better and better. We have smartphones, after all. But every year of my life has been worse than the year before. Every year we have more dirty water than the year before that. Every year we foul more of the air than the year before that. Every year we wash more of the soil into the world's oceans. Every year we ratchet up carbon dioxide. Every year we drive to extinction hundreds of species every single day. Every single day. Every year we see the transfer of wealth. This is the whole definition of civilization. We see the transfer of wealth from the poor to the wealthy at an accelerating rate. Things are getting better? Really? Maybe for a long time for relatively wealthy white men like me, things did get better. But for the rest of the world, things were getting worse. And certainly for the non-human species with which we share this most wondrous of planets, the world has been becoming a worse and worse place every single year. So what to do? Recognize two things, and we're complex enough organisms that we can hold two thoughts in our mind at the same time. And I get this from Derek Jensen, and I'm paraphrasing. One, life is really, really good. And acknowledge that, and live that, and be the absolute amazing human you are capable of being. That's one. Life is really, really wonderful. And two, things are really fucked up. And we're complex enough organisms, we can hold both of those ideas in our head. Things are really, really bad, especially for non-human species and for people who are not relatively wealthy white people. Things are really bad and they're getting worse. So what do we do about that? There's relatively little we can do to improve the macro situation. My whole life, every class I taught, I encourage people to not have children. Because at the root of many of our predicaments is human overpopulation. And I think I affected exactly, zero of my students actually went out there and lived my message. So I didn't change a thing, and I was in a position of relative authority, right? People in college sort of look up to college professors, if only because they need to suck up to get the grade. But then when they leave, when they walk away, they go and do their own thing. So I would encourage you, since I don't think you're going to save the world, whatever that even means, that you be present with the ones you're with, that you enjoy every single moment and maybe even contribute to moments of joy. And I think that same answer applies regardless of your age, by the way. Yeah.
Do you have children?
I do not have children.
Do you have good friends that have children?
I share a 2.7 acre homestead my wife and I share with another couple and their 11-and-a-half-year-old son. So I have young children in my life.
Where would you advise that 11-year-old child to live in the coming years?
Well, usually when people ask me where somebody should go in light of abrupt climate change, I recommend that they go inside, that they go into their heart and figure out what it means to be a human being. And that applies whether you're 11.5 years old or 111.5 years old. If you're talking about a geographic location where there will be humans longest on the planet, I suspect that would be as far south as you can get without getting into Antarctica. So that means Chile and South Africa and New Zealand and Southern Australia. I think there will be habitat for humans longer in those places than there will be in the Northern Hemisphere, and especially in the interior of large continents, and especially in the interior of large continents in the Northern Hemisphere. So,
why do you choose the Southern Hemisphere over the Northern Hemisphere?
Why did you choose to live in the stupid, ignorant, asinine place you live? That was the question, if I can paraphrase. Yeah, mistakes have been made. You know, when I chose, well, I moved there for a lot of reasons. I didn't know that one of them would be that I was going to die next week, right? So, mistakes have been made. And they continue to be made, as it turns out. Here in the front and then back there.
So I have two questions. One, how do you avoid being crucified for your activist, your willingness to be the truth teller, the villain? That's the first question. And then the second question is, I guess I don't have a real clear definition of sociopath. I think it's someone without a conscience, because I can't understand how the actions are still going on when they will be also swallowed up.
Right, so why have I not been crucified? I don't know, and I'm just begging for it. I have no idea. Why can I not attract the attention of, and There are 3 Chinese curses. Most people know the one, and they think that's the dire one, right? May you live in interesting times. Yeah, that's the 3rd most dire. That's nothing. The 2nd most dire, the one that most people don't know about, is may you attract the attention of the government. I've done that, and yet I can't get thrown in Guantanamo Bay to save my life, or whatever. And then may you find what you're looking for. That's the worst curse of all. Sociopaths, as I understand it, are people who don't have empathy. And so why don't they care about their children? Because they don't care about anybody.
About themselves. That would be for
Well, sure, maybe they care about themselves, but they're really interested in accumulating power now. So, you know, they're actually living my message. Live here now. Oh yeah, they got that figured out. One more quick question. Yes.
I was just going to ask, so is there a fix, or are we doomed on the Earth?
Is there a fix? Well, there's a approximately 40-year lag between when carbon dioxide is emitted and when most of the warming occurs. And we didn't understand that until about 4 years ago when it appeared in the journal literature. So since 1970, we've burned more fossil fuels, twice as many fossil fuels, emitted more than twice as much carbon since 1970 as the entire history of humanity before then. And we're at 0.85 C above baseline. In addition, it's pretty clear that we have methane coming out of the Arctic Ocean at an exponential rate. So given those 2 factors, I suspect that we're doomed. I don't think there's a thing we can do about it, and this is why my message differs from every other climate scientist I know. Every other climate scientist I know says if we just change to squirrely light bulbs and Priuses, it'll all be fine. It won't. So I think there's nothing to be done. That said, I strongly encourage action. I have never encouraged inaction. If you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, then do. Action, as Edward Abbey pointed out, is the antidote to despair. So let's do something, and in fact I think it's quite liberating once you get the death sentence as an individual, you live. Once somebody tells somebody, well, you have terminal cancer and you have somewhere between 6 months and 6 years to live, that person doesn't go lay down and cry for the rest of their life. No, they go live, they do the things they always wanted to do. And guess what? They talk like they never believed possible. One of my neighbors, Kate, had cancer and survived. And now, if you say something that she doesn't agree with or is not supported by logic or fact, she tells you. Now, some would say she's not tactful. I would say she's brutally honest. And her friends really appreciate that. Both of us. So, I think there are lots of things we can do as individuals. I don't think there's anything we can or will do as a society to turn this thing around. But there's lots we can do as individuals that all fall under the heading of that 3-word mantra of mine, live here now. Thanks very much. I'll be around for the next several days, and I look forward to interacting with you some more.
All right. You know, I'm actually finding it very valuable to look back. This is now 6 years ago, almost, I guess, right? 2014, 6 years ago, that he gave that presentation. It helps me to see that, oh my goodness, you know, we've had this level of warning for several years, and it's just getting more intense. And, you know, Guy seemed, for lack of better words, you know, reasonably composed and, you know, even happy back then. Look at him now, he just kind of seems like he's, I don't know. But, you know, I mean, it's just, I'd like to hear your all of your thoughts. I mean, are you finding it valuable, like I am, that to look back 6 years ago and see, wow, fundamentally the same message, but now the data and the results, the symptoms are just much more extreme. Going on mute.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead, Emery.
I was just gonna say that I look back all the time. I review these videos quite often. You know, he rolls with the punches. He just keeps going with pretty much the same energy. I mean, I there's so many words I could have for him. It's just kind of takes your breath away when you think about everything that he's talked about and how he talks about it. And he's the ultimate teacher, and like he's said in many of his videos, that's his reason for being alive. To teach his whole existence. So he. Guys, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's definitely a modern day, like he is a teacher, obviously. He's a professor, he's a teacher, but he's a modern day prophet too. Like, I mean, he dares to step out in the limelight for a long time now, like, and speak the truth. You know what I mean? That's what prophets do. They speak the truth and they tell what's coming. And he's been speaking the truth and telling what's coming for a while now, like. And even in that video, and it's only 6 years ago, and we all know like that, or even anyone that doesn't really know much about climate change knows that those are changes that occur over very long periods of time. And yet that video was only 6 years ago, and he was stating there in the figures like that, even IPC projections were 6 degrees by the end of the century, and that was 6 years ago. Now this last year, 2019, the United Nations, the IPCC, the United Nations were put on, basically John Doyle said it to them, remember this day and remember this moment now. This is when you're now being told that the United Nations are now being told that we're heading for 10 degrees within 10 years. 10 degrees by the end of the century. And he said, along the way to 10 degrees, I might remind you that we're extinct at 4. You know what I mean? So 10 degrees at the end of the century, that's grand. That's one thing, that's horrifying and everything else, but everything's extinct at 4. Well, we're extinct at 4. 4 comes a lot sooner, you know what I mean, than the end of the century. And even the IPCC now have lowered the line to 2030, like. And as Guy McPherson and as Kevin Hester said, even what we do know, we still don't know the whole of it. It's even worse than we do know, you know what I mean? That's the horrifying thing about it. It's even worse than what we really do know, like, even those who are clued in. And that's the horrifying thing about it. And in 6 years there, just that video there, you could see the change. I mean, IPCC, who are being so, rigid and cautious about what they say and about keeping their figures very moderate and everything else, they're willing now to say 6 years later that we're heading for 10 degrees by the end of the century, and that extinction is at 4. So we're in big trouble by 2030, the IPCC has said. And we know that even those figures are wrong, and even though we know that what we know is even worse than that again. That's a horrifying prospect, like, you know what I mean? And it's even more horrifying to realize that the rest of the world has no fucking idea what's going on. As I said, 1% of Ireland here gets the real news, and by real news I mean, like, for a national TV, we've only 2 channels really in Ireland, like our, you know, and our national news channel. Like, you know, what they'd be putting up there and showing people as news is pathetic, absolutely pathetic. They're so consumed with what's going on in their own island and just the general news then from abroad of mainstream news. It's pathetic what they show people. Anyway, sorry, I'm rabbiting on.
Well, you know how we ended that video, right? And Jamin could repeat those last 3 words.
Live here now.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're living here now, and we do what we wish to do, and you know, we're not going to despair, even though we have plenty of you know, plenty of reasons to despair, right? So we don't have to do that.
No, we don't, because another sentence he said was about his move to the, you know, down to, when he moved down to the south and went living off the land and everything. He said, you know, mistakes were made and mistakes will be made. You know, it's a learning process too for him. And even up, like, that was 6 years ago. And here we are, like, at the end of 2019, and he was introducing, or start of 2020, he was introducing Jamin to Ye Tau, with the possibility that here's something that might actually help. If this is possible. So, you know, things change. So that gives, you know, I'm not saying that we can fix the problem in no way, in any way, shape or form. But I'm just saying we need to let people know, and so we can have a lash of try and then go out with dignity anyway.
Hey everybody, I moved inside. We've got company out on the back, happily so. And yeah, just to chime in, I mean, all we can do is what we can do, and it's really like a battle of 2 exponentials. You have exponential planetary overheating. Let's say that's this one, right? And then you have collective superintelligence, right? It's the battle of 2 exponentials. It's the cosmic game of chicken that you know, I show in that one slide, right at the end of showing the exponential coevolution of the platform of collective intelligence and the actual collective intelligence, right? And I think, are you ladies eating now?
Yeah, we are.
Okay. I think I'll take a dinner break, and let me go ahead and pause recording anyway.